Today is Radhastami. It's a big day for us, special day for us. The last few years I've been in Vrindavan for Radhastami, which is really nice. But it was also nice to be here. It was also real special. Nice to be here. I got a chance to read and chant and meditate in a way that I'm not able to if I'm traveling and with a tour of people, with a group of people. I've got some thoughts. It could be louder. Okay. All right. I'll make it louder. Hare Krishna devotees, our lineage, the Gaudiya lineage, from the time of the Goswamis to present, so for the last 500 years, we weren't the first devotees of Radharani. There's always a consort. So it's Lakshmi Narayan. And it's actually there's a Shekinah in the biblical tradition, a feminine counterpart to God. It's always Sita Ram, Lakshmi Narasimha. There's always a female counterpart. When you look at Hinduism, the deity's always carrying a weapon of some sort. They've always got a vahana. They've always got a vehicle. Like Ganesh rides on a rat. Ganga Devi rides on an alligator. Or specifically she rides on a makara, which is sort of a alligator, shark combination. Seems to be almost a mythical beast. Chimera. Spacing on the proper pronunciation. But these mystical beasts with the face of one animal and the body of another. Vishnu has Garuda, as does Krishna. Everybody has a different set of weapons that they carry. All the different manifestations of Vishnu have a different configuration of the four symbols. 2 symbols for blessing, the lotus and the conch, and 2 symbols for punishing, the chakra and the club. And so, if you look at Hinduism, there's a formula. Like if you want to know what the deity is, you look at what's in the hands of the deity, what's placed in the hands of the deity, and you get a sense of what's going on. That's how you tell. In South, sometimes they put a mustache on Krishna, so you could never tell. There's certain things they get real regional. But what's in the hands and the vehicle, those are pan-Indian, and they allow you to tell what deity you're dealing with some conviction, with some certainty. So, Radharani and Krishna worshipped as a couple. It hasn't been around so long. You know, Lakshmi Narayan, those deities go back thousands of years. Sitaram, thousands of years. Lakshmi, even Krishna Rukmini goes back quite a ways, but Radha Krishna, in terms of its, now Krishna Leela, the Bhagavatam, but Radharani's not really in the Bhagavatam. The gopis are, but not Radharani by name. They mention one special gopi, but they don't mention her by name. So our tradition says, oh, that's Radharani. We fill in the blanks. But the worship, the explicit worship of Radha and Krishna, you've got Nimbarka who did it in the first millennia. You've got Jayadev Goswami in the 12th century, maybe 13th century. You got Vallabhacharya, the 15th century, 16th. You've got our group in the 15th, 16th century. But the worship of Radha with Krishna wasn't so well established until the last 500,000 years. Bilavamangal Thakur wrote extensively also. So, I mean, you have stuff, and even you have precursors to the Gaudiya movement, precursors to Mahaprabhu. It wasn't like Mahaprabhu was the first person to reveal Radharani to the world. Other poets had done that before him, such as Jayadev Goswami and Vidyapati and Chandidas. I don't believe Kalidas wrote about Radharani per se, but there were precursors. There were poets and poems. Even the song we sing was written by Jayadev Goswami, this Jai Jagadish Hare. That song about Nrsingadev was from the Dasavatar Stotra of Jayadev Goswami. He wrote a book called the Geet Govinda, which is very famous about Radharani explicitly. I believe it was in the 1200s, so it would be the 13th century. But I'd have to look to double check my dates. So the worship of Radharani is a little less popular and pan-Indian. It's not even that popular in South India to this day, where Vaishnavism thrives, where there's huge communities of tens of millions of Vaishnavas. And so much of our practice comes from South India. But you find Sitaram for sure. Even Rukmini and Krishna, yes. Lakshmi Narayan for sure. Lakshmi Narasimha, yes. Lakshmi Varaha also. Not Radha and Krishna. It's in North India. Radha and Krishna has become especially famous. But that's even fairly recent. As recently as the turn to the 18th century, kind of like late 1600s, early 1700s. During that period of time, when they began to worship Radharani in Jaipur, it disturbed people. They were being worshipped in Vrindavan, but the Muslims were coming and they had to shift over to Jaipur. And the worship of Radharani caused quite a fuss in Jaipur, because arguably Radha and Krishna weren't married. And so to worship an unmarried God disturbed people. I mean, Prabhupada spoke about this. Prabhupada said that Padre Sahib, Sahib means Lord. It's a term used by Indian people to refer to the British. And it's taken on, in my lifetime, I think even at that time, it can be used in a derogatory way. But it means like Lord. It's a pretty respectable term. And so Prabhupada talks about Padre Sahib, which means, obviously an English Christian minister, who was in Vrindavan, and this is during Prabhupada's time in Vrindavan. This would have been the 50s. This has been in the 50s. He came to Vrindavan and he was chastising all the locals that you're worshiping God unmarried, having dalliances with other men's wives. This is obscene. And Prabhupada was furious that the Goswamis of that time were unable to defeat the Christian missionary as he was speaking ill. These criticisms come even from local pundits, like local freedom fighter activists, like the Indian equivalent of SJWs, social justice warriors. So the Indian equivalent of those, a lot of times will segue into atheism and will get real critical of Krishna. Maybe even bounce over and become a Buddhist or something like that because it's seen as less offensive or less racy or less edgy. So in the early 1700s, when Radharani and the Krishna deities of Vrindavan had to run to Jaipur to escape the Muslims who were wrecking temples left and right in Vrindavan, the worship of Radharani was a problem. The worship of Radharani was a problem. Enough so that we had to send our pundits to the court in Jaipur to present a case for the legitimacy of Radha Krishna worship, to show our bona fides, and to establish the appropriateness of it and the scriptural authenticity of it. We were successful. But it was a thing. What does that sound? Huh? Oh, okay. So that has to stop. Thank you. We had to fight for the right to worship Radharani. Now, one of the ways we did that was we said that Radha and Krishna were married. And if Radha and Krishna are married, then we're in good shape. It's like Sita Ram and Lakshmi Narayan, all of a sudden everything's prim and proper. That was one strategy which was used by our lineage, was to demonstrate that Radha and Krishna were married. In fact, several of our acharyas wrote books. There's a book called the Madhava Mahotsav written by Jiva Goswami, where he goes through and details the marriage of Radha and Krishna. And so we wrote literature to supplement that was like a legitimate thing. we spoke on it, it became part of our canon. So we'll call that the easy solution. That was the easy solution, that Radha and Krishna were properly married. The problem with that is that most of our lineage was quite specific that Radha and Krishna were not married. And even that Radharani was married to somebody else, and therefore her dancing with Krishna and her romance with Krishna was extramarital. Our tradition is almost universal in its appreciation of the extramarital nature of Radha and Krishna's association, which, definitely throws a spanner in the works. Because if you try to downplay and fix it and tidy things up, and then you've got a bunch of our leaders saying, no, we don't accept that fix. And they put their foot down and they drop the hammer that this is what it is. It becomes a little bit more of a thing. Now we get around a lot of that by pointing out that Radharani, really, properly conceived of, Radharani is Krishna. Ekamanau api bhuvi pura deha bedam gatautam. That Radha and Krishna are ekamanau. Ekamanau means one soul, one being. Interestingly, ekamanau, that ow, ekatmanau, excuse me. Ekatmanau. That ow in ekatmanau. Eka atma, one soul. That has to stop. Hey, Narayan, please stop writing. Thank you. Ekatmanau. Atma means soul or self. Eka means oneself. They're one self. But the ow, that suffix ow, is in a dual case. Just like in Spanish, you'll say tiene, he has. And then you'll say tienen, they have. If you change the word tienen and tiene, by changing the suffix, you indicate plural or singular. So Sanskrit has a dual case for two. Eka atmanau means one soul, but it's written in a dual case. Do you follow? Like if you say persona, yo tengo, I have it, right? Yo tengo, I have it. But if I say yo tienen, they have, it doesn't make any sense. Ek atmanau is purposefully a grammatical paradox because it uses the dual case. They are one soul, api bhuvi, but in this world, dui deha, they've achieved two forms. Pura beta, they've been divided into two forms. So Radha and Krishna are one being, which means really, properly conceived of, Radharani is God. In fact, to understand what this means for our tradition, we understand it just like Krishna gives rise to all the avatars, Radharani gives rise to all of the Shaktis. So Sita is technically an avatar of Radharani. as is Lakshmi, as ultimately is Durga, a few steps removed. You follow this? So they are one soul that have achieved two forms eternally, is what's been said. Does that make sense? Here it is in Bengali. Radha Krishna ek atma dui dehadari. Radha Krishna ek atma. They're one soul. Dui, duo, two. Dui dehadari. They have two bodies. Anonye vilase rash ashwadhana kori. And they do this so they can enjoy and taste ras with one another. Anyonye, with one another. Ras ashwadhan, they can taste rasa together. So the Supreme Lord became two so that he could worship, he could relish love. But when did he become two? Since forever. The nature of Krishna is to enjoy, therefore it's the nature of God to love. Love means lover and beloved, therefore Radha and Krishna have existed forever, although technically they're really part of a full conception of divinity. All the male avatars come from Krishna, and all the female avatars come from Radharani. So all the gopis are actually incarnations of Radharani. So's Lakshmi, so's even Durga, the same way Shiva ultimately comes from Vishnu. This is our tradition. This is how we see things. From that perspective, somebody once said to Prabhupada, Krishna had 16,108 wives. And Prabhupada said, no, Krishna has unlimited wives. Everybody belongs to Krishna. You're a thief and an adulterer for even thinking you have one wife. Everything belongs to God. You follow? So from a theological perspective, if you establish that when we say Krishna, we mean God, and that this whole unmarried, married thing is just in the Leela to make things spicier and more ecstatic and increase the flavor in the Leela, then it resolves the problem. You follow? So on one hand, we just say Radha and Krishna get married, problem solved. Unfortunately, most of our tradition did not like that resolution. They pushed hard for the idea because in the past time, if Radha and Krishna have obstacles to meeting, like their parents are blocking them, and there's other spouses involved, and it's forbidden, then it makes the pastimes, and Krishna's playing on his flute, and everybody dropping what they're doing and running and surrendering to Krishna. And now they're breaking all the rules to be with Krishna, and they show their level of devotion, of how dedicated they are to Krishna. They'll do anything for Krishna. Of course, that gets into something called antinomianism, that you can get away with anything, which is one of the big faults with Christianity nowadays, that you can do anything and be forgiven. So you're going to have to escape that one. But if you properly establish that Krishna is an all-good, all-powerful deity, that Radharani is also an all-good, all-powerful deity, that we just have a male/female conception of God, then the whole thing is relatively easily resolved, because even if it's a divinely inspired illusion, there's no actual fact to Radha and Krishna being separated. Everything belongs to God, including all of us, and in that sense, Krishna is the husband of the entire universe, what to speak of Radharani, irrespective of how it might look in a snapshot in the mind of a sadhu who's relishing the pastimes. Did you follow that? That's not too difficult to explain. That's not too difficult to explain. So Radha and Krishna are collectively a male and female conception of God that are the source of the entire cosmos. For the purpose of pastimes, they forget their own divinity so they can disport themselves on equal terms and relish intimate loving pastimes, the same way Krishna wants to relish intimate loving pastimes with us. But there's no factual substance. Krishna never stops being the Supreme Lord, nor does Radharani stop being the Supreme Lord. Therefore, they're beyond married. They're one soul. According to one of our acharyas, they're a blue and a yellow lotus growing out of a single stem in a lake of rasa. There's a lake of love. And out of that lake of love comes a single stem. And the single stem has two lotuses, one blue and one yellow. And that's Radha and Krishna. They are like a flame and its heat and light. They're like musk and its scent. They're like fire and its light. They're inseparable. One thing is the Shakti, or the energy. In a lot of ways, although this is never stated by our lineage, you could say that in a lot of ways, Radharani is the Dharma of Krishna. She's the heart of Krishna. You know, sometimes we'll say it's the dharma of snow to be cold, the dharma of fire to be hot. Radharani is Krishna's heart. That is, practically speaking, said. As Prabhupada would like to say, Radharani is Krishna's compassionate nature, but personified. It's Shaktiman, the possessor of Shakti, and Shakti. So Radharani is the direct Shakti of Krishna. So Radharani would be the heat of the fire of Krishna, the scent of the musk of Krishna. Or simply put, there are two lotuses growing out of a single stem, which even shows more equality between them. Ek Atma, they're one self. Dui Deha Dodi, they hold two bodies. Anyonye Vilase Rasashwadhan. And they do that so they can enjoy exchanges of love. How long have they been doing that? Forever. That resolves the problem of Radharani as an unmarried consort, because she's no longer a goddess or a consort. She's the Supreme Lord herself. And a proper conception of Krishna, a proper conception of Radharani, really fixes everything. You could almost get away with just a proper conception of Krishna, who owns everything, and any appearance otherwise is just for the purpose of pastime. But if you double up and have Radharani and properly understand how we conceive of her, you solve the problem twice. So you can say they're married, which is usually like the easy go-to. In fact, we never really discuss the unmarried nature of Radha and Krishna, except with those who are initiated into our cult and who have no problem with it and appreciate it. But if we did get pushed on it, and like our acharyas make us, and somebody actually read our books and was like, now you can't get away with that, then we go this route. And if you just properly conceive of Krishna, then everybody becomes Krishna's wife, and any appearance otherwise is just a figment of your imagination. But if you double up and say Radharani is Krishna as well, which we do, you've solved the problem twice. Add in the marriage and you got a third solution. These are some of the strategies used by our tradition to deal with this. However, for me, this gives rise to an even bigger problem. And the even bigger problem is, why do you think God is male and female? And why is God human? For me, the humanness of God, that we think that God's a little blue boy who takes care of cows, the humanness of God is a larger problem than, depending on when you're born. Like if you didn't believe in slavery and everybody believed in slavery, and you had to argue that you shouldn't have slavery. It seems just preposterous to us that somebody would need to argue for that. It seems like the dumbest thing in the world. Like, you almost would want to just stand up in an assembly and be like, what's wrong with all you people? Are you idiots? Right? But that wasn't the way it went down. You had to actually argue, because the status quo was drawing and quartering was okay, so was tarring and feathering, and so was slavery. I mean, there was a time where it was like, any testimony that was given but didn't include torture was inadmissible in court. You had to get the testimony and then torture somebody as well and make sure they told the same story. Because under torture, people change their stories. Of course, under torture, people change the stories to tell you whatever you want, so you're less likely to get the real. But it used to be that if you didn't get your testimony under torture, then it wasn't admissible. So you had to pull a few fingernails, cut off a few limbs, and then what they said was admissible. So for us, it's like, this is just no big deal. But for the kings who had, communities where the worship of the deity had been established for millennia at that point, and all of a sudden there's a new kid in town, it's Radha and Krishna, it's like, whoa, what's that? It was a big deal. It was no joke. I mean, there was no separation of church and state. The king could have shut us down. The stakes were high. The legitimacy of our lineage was at stake. In Vrindavan, we'd already established it. Our poets had established it. Our saints had established it. Everybody was wrapped up in the worship of Radharani, even to this day. I mean, it's the only place in India you go where people greet you and say Radhe Radhe. Only place in all of India where that's how you say hello to somebody. Jai Radhe, Radhe Radhe, Radhe Shyam. But as that worship of Radha and Krishna became popularized and started to break out into new communities in the north of India, it had to be legitimated. I mean, I was just reading a debate with a Sri Vaishnava scholar who was saying, oh, well, Lakshmi is okay, but Radharani is not. This is just like last year. And he had all his references. So the Sri Sukta. But I wrote a bit of a rebuttal demonstrating that, even his Sri Sukta from the Veda didn't delineate Sita, which their tradition worships all the time. And so then he said, we can only debate according to the Veda. And I said, well, then you can't worship Sita, because Sita is not in the Veda. You have to go to the Itihasa, to the Ramayan literature, in order to establish the authenticity of Sita, and your tradition worships Sita, and therefore, because your acharyas worship Sita and have for over 1,000 years, your entire tradition has become defunct, and you're actually insulting all of your predecessors. Do you follow this? And so I said, so if you allow for the worship of Sita, then it means you're adding in texts which are not the four Vedas, which is what you said we had to only go by. So by the four Vedas, you only get Lakshmi, which just destroyed your own tradition. Do you guys follow this? Well, no, we have other texts for Sita. Yeah, and we have other texts for Radharani. And the same way you read the Sri Sukta and you find kind of little bits and pieces that authenticate your worship of Sita Devi. The Sri Sukta is an old Vedic hymn to the goddess. We also read that same Sri Sukta and we find Radharani hidden in those same pages. And it's fully explicated elsewhere. I mean, this happens all the time. It's just like, this happens all the time. I mean, we have to release some information, and And so we set the stage and we do some foreshadowing and we prime the pump and we leak the information to the press and the information comes out. And it seems like it's come out spontaneously on its own, but it's actually been engineered to come out in a particular way. We do this all the time. I mean, take a look at how we got involved in Iraq under Bush W. with the weapons of mass destruction. It was all manufactured. They faked it all. There were no weapons of mass destruction. They swore to us on a stack of Bibles they were going to find them. They never found them. They pulled the same crap with Vietnam. They've been doing this forever. Every time we want to invade a country, we manufacture some evidence, we leak it to the press, and then we have to invade that country. You follow? It's just some humongous threat, and we have to overcome it. Every time a country in South America would embrace communism, and it would threaten American business interests, where we were drilling for oil down there or something like that, we would just, kill the communist-leaning leader and replace it with a kind of a military junta who was, terror, like with Pinochet in Chile, and Noriega in Panama, and the Contras in Nicaragua, that we funded for years. I mean, we sold, the CIA sold crack cocaine, imported crack cocaine, and used the money from that because they couldn't get money from Congress to fund the Contras in Nicaragua in the 80s. It's the whole thing. It seems like a huge fiasco. Because we wanted to overthrow the legitimately elected Sandinista government. Because they were communists. We weren't into it. We couldn't control them. We tried to kill Fidel Castro so many times because he took all of Dole's property. We were growing bananas and stuff down there, and he took their property. He said, this is our country's property now. I'm sorry. You guys have to leave. He didn't take all of it. We took a bunch of it. And so we tried to take over their country because we have American business interests and they get threatened. So we manufacture all sorts of evidence. So sometimes, things may not be there, but you put them there, or something may be one way, you want to be somewhere else. So one of my gurus, he was speaking at the University of Florida at Gainesville, and the teacher of Hinduism was challenging him. How do you authenticate the worship of Radharani? It's so recent. And he just made a simple point. He says, just because it was recently revealed to the world doesn't mean it's necessarily recent. A lot of times there are things which are true and they're going on behind the scenes, and then they're publicized at a certain point, and they're like, that information is revealed. That doesn't mean that's when it came about. Or you might, there's inventions, but gravity wasn't invented, it was discovered. It already existed, you discovered it. You discovered quantum mechanics. You didn't invent quantum mechanics. It's always been happening on a molecular level. You might invent, a new recipe for a cake, but a lot of these things are getting discovered. So for us, whether this thing was revealed to the world more recently or not by our lineage, everything at some point was revealed. We should be more concerned about the truth of what's being revealed than the date attached to it. That's another little thing you can throw on there to deal with the recentness of it. But I think it's a much bigger problem that you're left with the humanness of Radha Krishna. And the male and femaleness of Radha and Krishna. I find those to be more troublesome elements of our theology to explain to your average intellectual who's trained to think of transcendence as being beyond human and beyond such things as male and female. We say the soul isn't male or female, so why do we think God is male or female? I think this is a much bigger challenge. And I think there's really three ways to deal with this. Now, 150 years ago, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, one of our acharyas, he wrote a book called the Krishna Samhita, which had an elaborate introduction attached to it. And in that introduction, he took three terms: Kanishta, Madhyam, and Uttama, which means little, middle, and topmost. This is your Kanishta finger. It's your little finger. Madhyam means middle, and Uttam means topmost. An Uttam ticket is a first-class ticket in India. So, top, middle, and low. He took these terms, which were used in our sacred literature to describe different types of devotees, and he reimagined them. He was writing at a time where Hinduism was on attack because the early Indologists were subjecting Hinduism to literary scrutiny, literary criticism, and also the Christians were out to get us. So he said that Kanishta was the blind Hindu who just accepted everything because the scriptures said so and was fanatically attached to his faith and could not argue and could not establish anything. Interestingly, that Kanishta is the same Kanishta as spoken about in our texts hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. But he said the Madhyam, the middle one, was the person who embraced allegorical and symbolic interpretations of our scripture and gave up the literal meaning. That traditionally was a Pashandi, an atheist, an apostate. But for Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he said that those people were in the middle because they were trying to hold on to a version of their faith which would stand up to scrutiny. You follow? And so when the literal meaning failed, instead of becoming fanatic, they switched to symbolic and allegorical interpretations of our scriptures. So now the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Gandhi did this. He said it's the body and the opposing sides, the good and evil within all of us. That kind of, it's pretty standard stuff. It's like what you'll get from most enlightened neo-Hindu gurus, Indian or Western. He called that the middle path, although traditionally that would make you a heretic. You guys following this? And then he had the Uttam. The Uttam was the Saragrahi Vaishnava, the essence-grabbing Vaishnava, the essence-seeking Vaishnava. Sara means essence, and Grahi means one who grabs it, one who grabs the essence, one who seeks the essence. That Vaishnava was familiar with the Adhunikavad, the modern methods of literary criticism. He was familiar with all the arguments. He could deal with them. But he managed to hold on to an intellectually respectable understanding of our scriptures, which required some modification, but not a full-fledged allegorical, symbolic interpretation. Did you follow that? He let go of some of the literalism, but not everything, and was able to liaise with modern textual scrutiny and at the same time keep his faith alive. This is similar to the Uttam in our classic literature, who was Shastra Yukti Nipuna. He was a genius at understanding the scriptures. So 3 levels. Your low-level Christian fanatic from Arkansas, your standard neo-Hindu, symbolic, allegorical purveyor, and finally someone who was learned in the entire tradition and also the modern methods of inquiry, could respond to them and streamline the tradition, but hold on to the essence of it. 1, 2, 3. You follow? I want to use that same model and take a look at how to deal with the humanity of Radharani and the femininity and masculinity of Radha and Krishna. The first one is you just say, hey, that's what our scriptures say. I memorize the verses from our sacred text, and this is what it is. I don't know, but that's what our scriptures say. You follow? The Leela is real, male is real, female is real. You're female and male. You come from God, therefore those things must exist in God. And therefore the femininity and the masculinity are real, and the Leela is real, and I don't see any reason to reject it. It doesn't sound terrible. It also doesn't sound too dissimilar to what most devotees will say. God's the source of everything. Here you are. You're male and female. So therefore God must have those things within him as well. And therefore we consider that God has masculine and femininity within himself. You want love. Love and takes two. And therefore Radha and Krishna have to exist in order for love to be exchanged. It's not nothing. The problem with that is it leads us to questions like, well, how come God's not a cockroach? Cockroaches also come from God. How come God's a human? How come God's not an animal? How come God's not everything? How come that's not the highest vision? If your argument is that we come from God, everything comes from God, you knucklehead. So why did you pick out the things that are like you? Why is that all you're into? Is the things that are like you? It seems like you're co-opting the idea that everything comes from God, but then you're picking and choosing, and you're guilty of selective reasoning and cherry picking. See how that sets you up for that one? The second level, the symbolic allegorical level, deals with that. And you can just simply say, well, I'm in a human body and I want to fall in love with God. And it's kind of hard to fall in love with an asexual being. It's kind of hard to fall in love with a non-human being. I find it hard to love dogs and cats, or what to speak of abstract ideas with the same intensity I love people. And so irrespective of what God actually is, I need to embrace the notion of a human deity in order to fall madly in love. So I can establish the legitimacy of falling in love with God, of romantic love for God, of intimate love for God, and therefore I'm left with no alternative but to, in this body, cultivate love for God in a human form, and therefore I make a human male and female form because that's most like me, it's most easiest to relate to, and that's just what I got to do. See how that goes? I don't know what's real, but it's like a symbolic thing. It's like an allegorical thing. See how that embraces that notion? That tends to resolve that. You kind of get into stuff, well, okay, what if you're gay? Can I have like a Krishna and Krishna together? If it's just based on what I need, and I'm the genesis, then I can pretty much decide what I need to fall in love with. You follow? And that gets kind of tricky. That gets kind of tricky. Once you make yourself the center of reality, the egocentric center of reality in your worship, and it's all really about you, that opens up some doors you might not want to open up. They'll be tough to shut. It's a bit of a Pandora's box. You guys following this? So those are the first two methods. Generally speaking, I find in the Hare Krishna movement, we just do the first one. The second one I offered you, we don't do. It's a little too edgy for us. But it does move the conversation forward. The problem is it still has some pretty big gaping holes that have to be buttoned up if you want a workable theology. And now we're left with the last one, what I would call the Uttam position. Okay? Here's the Uttam position. Human beings are designed to understand God. We are special amongst all the species in the world. We're capable of more metacognition. We have religion. We have writing. We have like an incredibly developed language. We write books. We make statues. We have opposable thumbs. We're an apex predator, although we have almost nothing to make us apex predators except for our brain. If you look at us, the encephalization of our massive head compared to our body means we were put here to think, just like you can see what a tiger was put here to do by looking at his claws. We were put here to think. We were put here to think about what we are, and so it makes perfect sense that our form would be closer to divinity than that, let's say, of a pig. This is an unpopular idea, saying that we're better than other people, other species. However, I don't find that it's deficient in any way from a logical or the point of view of reason. I think it makes perfect sense. If God was all good and all powerful, and as we were evolving through the species, we got to a place where we could really choose God, it would make sense that in that form that we were able to choose God, we would have a form which was theomorphic, which was really representative of what God looked like. And because the human species is a species in which you're able to meditate on God, it goes to good reason that we are more like God than the other animals. And that's a way of doing the first argument, that everything comes from God, but we are made to choose God, at least have that opportunity, and therefore we're more like God, and therefore God is human. Also, God's also an animal and all the other things too. We say that. We have we have reptiles, that's kurma, right? We have mammals, that's varaha. We have a Neanderthal, that's Parshuram, kind of half man. We have a half man, half animal form, that's Nrsimhadev. We got aquatics, not even a reptile. We got kurma. We got the whole gamut. We're crushing it. We took the evolutionary scale before Darwin ever came up with it. And we have a deity for each one. And our scriptures say that Krishna actually incarnates in every species. But the supreme form is human-like. It's not really human-like. We're theomorphic. We're divine-like. Because in this form we can choose God. As far as I can see, that argument holds water. Madhuri kind of looks off to the side disapprovingly, but I've learned not to ask her what she's thinking of because it can go south real quick. As far as I can see, that makes perfect sense, and there's no deficiency in it. You follow? Next, there is no way that when we think about the nature of God, we don't use ourselves as a starting off point. What else are we going to do? Divine command theory means we go to scriptures. But if you don't want to go to scriptures and you want to reason through it, we have no choice but to use our own experience of this world and extrapolate from there. And so when we look at the world through our lens, it's not even that that's we should do something else. That's really the only place we can start. That's a version of number 2, that second one, but it's a little more, has a little more oomph to it. Because I'm saying that there is no other option. If you want to think about the nature of God, you have to start with yourself and start to think about what your father and mother would be like. It may take you beyond yourself if you realize there's a species which is more close to God and more divine and more capable of thought. And so you have to start to think of God in those terms. But until you find that one, if you're the best, then you got to roll with that. It's number 2, not in the point of view I'm just going with it could be anything, but I got to think of it in my terms where I'm the egocentric center. It's more just an honest acknowledgement. I got to start with myself. In which case a gay person may have a limited ability to think of Radha and Krishna in masculine and feminine terms. He might have to think of, I'm supposed to fall in love with Krishna the way I would fall in love with another boy, the way I would fall in love with another girl. You have no choice but to start with yourself when thinking about the nature of things beyond yourself. Did you follow that? That's like a version of number 1 and 2. So it's the first one, we're theomorphic, and we're closer. Therefore, it's not wrong for us to put ourselves at the apex. And we're not just saying everything came from God, therefore we also came from God. There's something special about us. Number two, it's not just that we have to, we have to fall in love, and it could be anything. No. We have to start with ourselves as we're reasoning. We also find that masculinity and femininity is all pervasive. I don't find any reason that is necessarily a deficiency of the spiritual world. If masculinity and femininity arise from the spiritual world, I don't find that that's a deficiency. Maybe it is like icky to you because you spent your life thinking that spirituality is the opposite of materialism, and materialism is male and female and everything in this world. But that's your own hang-up. That's that you think all things in this world are bad, and therefore religion has to be like the opposite of this world. That's like the Christian thing of creation ex nihilo. God created the world from nothing, and everything of this world is mammon, and God is wholly other and wholly transcendent, and he can't be immanent and transcendent, and therefore mammon, things of this world, never get you to God. I don't have that worldview. I have a monistic worldview, a pagan worldview, a worldview where everything is in some way connected to the divine. And when I see something which is all pervasive in this world, it makes me think, hey, that might also be all pervasive in that world, without the limitations in this world. If you're male in this world, you can't be female. If you're male, you suffer from certain diseases more than female. And so it's like there's like limitations placed on you. But there's no difficulty in conceiving of male and female unlimited, just like there's no difficulty in conceiving of it being a person, but still being unlimited. Having senses, but those senses being unlimited. Having the ability to love, but having that ability to love not be limited the way our ability to love is limited in this world. You follow? And so God becomes this world plus immanence plus transcendence. I think most of the difficulty we run into is because there's an unstated premise for most people that if things sound too human, it's rotten. If things are too personal, it's rotten. If there's too much love and emotion, it's rotten. If it's too detailed, it's rotten. Spirituality has to be abstract, indefinite. You almost can just say what God is not, can't say what God is. The more abstract, the more vague, the more koanic, the more metaphorical you are, the closer you're coming to transcendence. And that just means you're an impersonalist. And therefore, the more impersonal you're getting, the closer you're coming to transcendence. But I don't see any reason why that's a more legitimate perspective. Then the more personal you're getting, the closer you're coming to transcendence. In fact, I find that has more logic behind it because personhood exists. And you can have a person who's also available through an abstract, I'm down to 2 minutes. You could have a person who created an abstract computer program or email system or method of liaising with him that was far removed from himself. However, it's not possible to have that abstract thing create the human interaction. We find that things move from personalism to impersonalism. And the computer program or the indirect method is always derivative of the direct method, which is the individual. And so it makes more sense that God in his ultimate issue would be a person, and the indirect ways of relating to God would be derivative as opposed to those being primary, because then you'd never be able to get the person as a derivation. I realize I kind of said that real quick, but I'm down to 2 minutes, so that's just what I got for you today. So, we're back. Radharani and Krishna, when we say Radha and Krishna, we really mean it. God is Krishna, and God is also Radharani. They love each other eternally. They're male and female. They have a human-like form. We want to go back to heaven and serve with them. Radharani is the fountainhead of all existence, and so is Krishna. Today is her day. They represent the possessor of Shakti and the Shakti, musk and its scent, fire and its light, a blue and a yellow lotus growing from a single stem in an ocean of love. They have two forms so they can exchange rusts. They've been doing that forever. And they together are the complete moiety. They together are the complete conception of divinity. They together are the Godhead, the full conception of divinity for our tradition. It hasn't been around forever, but it makes a heck of a lot of sense. We say it's been around forever. You can go all the way back to the Sri Sukta and the earliest Vedic text, and you'll see